The Communist Party chief, Leonid Brezhnev, championed relaxation of Cold War tension with America, the policy that would be called Detente. He was on his way to the very top of Soviet power.
Brezhnev was a sincere person in many ways. He had been through the great patriotic war from beginning to end. He returned with the very strong conviction that he had to do his best to prevent war. This was illustrated every time he went to a collective farm or factory. He would ask people, "How are things?" And they would complain, but then they would say, "Well, we can put up with it as long as there is no war."
Every leader in any country has the need to express his character and to leave his mark in history. He wanted to become the leader of the Soviet government. One of the ways he had of strengthening his position was making foreign policy his priority.
American-Soviet relations were always at the center of our diplomacy. I would say that basically, whether the West believed it or not, our attitude was to have a more constructive relationship with the United States.
In Europe, the Cold War showed itself most painfully in the Iron Curtain that divided the two Germanys. West Germany's new chancellor, the Social Democrat Willy Brandt, had his own ideas for improving relations with the Soviet bloc. The Germans called it Ostpolitik.
Wir wollen ein Volk der guten Nachbarn sein und werden im Innern und nach außen.
Der entscheidende Schritt, der das Ganze in Gang gebracht hat,
The main thing that got the ball rolling was the decision of the Chancellor to call East Germany a state.
Regierungserklärung, die DDR als einen Staat zu bezeichnen. Das war, wenn Sie so wollen,
This was a fundamental change in our position,
unserer Position, die uns
which led to fierce criticism from the opposition.
erbitterte Gegnerschaft der CDU eingebracht hat.
In Moscow, people were all ears.
Moskau aber Aufmerksamkeit.
In our opinion, there were more sober voices among the Social Democrats, those who would seek common points of interest with us. Not similarities in our outlook, but similarities in our interests. I would like to stress the difference. If we found points in common which would preserve a balance of interests, this could lead relations between the Soviet Union and West Germany out of a dead end.
Willy Brandt became the first West German chancellor to visit East Germany.
Ich wünsche Ihnen einen recht angenehmen Aufenthalt. Danke Ihnen sehr für die Begrüßung, auch dafür, dass Sie gutes Wetter besorgt haben. Daran soll es nicht liegen. Danke sehr.
Brandt's visit was a triumph. To ordinary East Germans, he seemed to bring hope of change. But the Americans were worried.
My first reaction to Ostpolitik was concerned that it would lead to German nationalism, that if Germany operated on its own vis-à-vis the East, it would emphasize its own national concerns, if not immediately, then over a period of time.
Das Echo auf das, was wir uns vorgestellt haben.
The response we got from Nixon and Kissinger was one of doubt and suspicion.
Natürlich Skepsis war, Misstrauen.
Had we thought about everything?
Ich habe Kissinger als
I had informed Kissinger shortly before we got into office what we planned to do. He asked a lot of questions.
Und hat viele Fragen gestellt.
We reached the point where I said, I am not here to consult, but to inform.
Zu konsultieren, sondern zu informieren. Das war ein Ton,
This was a tone unheard of in Washington.
noch nicht gehört hatte.
While the danger we feared was real, the best way to avert it was not to fight it and then be accused of being the cause of permanent German partition, but rather to help guide it in a direction that was compatible with Allied policy. And so we established another back channel to Brandt through his associate Egon Bahr, and to the Soviets via Dobrinin and Falin. And we insisted that before anything could be concluded with respect to Germany, absolute assurances had to exist with respect to our position in Berlin.
Brandt's next destination was Moscow. He hoped to remove Russia's fear of its old German enemy. Brandt was willing to recognize Europe's post-war borders and the division between East and West.
Der Moskauer Vertrag war natürlich
The Moscow Accords were the key to our bilateral treaty system with the East.
Vertragssystems zum Osten.
The Federal Republic ceased being an excuse for the Soviet Union to keep the Eastern Bloc in line. The treaty was a signal from Moscow that there was a readiness for change.
Willy Brandt flew to another old German enemy.
In dem Wunsch, durch einen Vertrag dauerhafte Grundlagen für ein friedliches Zusammenleben zwischen der Bundesrepublik Deutschland und Polen zu schaffen, reisten Bundeskanzler Brandt und Außenminister Scheel nach Warschau.
Brandt had come to recognize Poland's western border, carved out of territory seized from Nazi Germany in 1945. The German Chancellor visited the site of the Warsaw Ghetto. Words failed him. He knelt at the memorial to Jewish fighters who resisted the Nazis.
Brandt war, wenn Sie so wollen, ein Glücksfall.
Brandt was a stroke of luck for German history. For the Americans, he symbolized reliability. He had proved himself the defender of Berlin against the menace of the East. And for the East, he was a resistance fighter against the Nazis, without any doubt.
Nazis eben unbezweifelbar gewesen ist.
In a divided Germany, these steps towards Detente brought welcome cracks in the Berlin Wall. Families and friends separated by the wall could see each other once again.
Okay, fine, we'll call you later.
The architects of America's new approach to the Cold War were Richard Nixon and his national security advisor, Henry Kissinger.
Henry was very temperamental, very bright, very territorial, very insecure. You could say the same thing about Richard Nixon. And they complemented one another a lot of the time. At the same time, they were rivals. They fought with one another. They fought not with one another, but behind one another's backs. They were devious.
The embassies, so basically what is happening...
The two men preferred to work in secret. Through back channels, they set up summit meetings in Beijing and Moscow.
But we have a variety of independent sources also.
Yeah, I know. None of them reliable.
None of them totally reliable.
That's right.
Nixon and Kissinger wanted the summits in China and the Soviet Union to help America get out of Vietnam. They also hoped to bring China into their diplomatic game.
The principal reason for seeking a rapprochement with China was to restore fluidity to the overall international situation. If there are 5 players and you can't deal with one of them, this produces rigidity. Secondly, we wanted to demonstrate to the American public that Vietnam was an aberration, that we had ideas for the construction of peace on a global scale.
Soviet leaders were alarmed after Kissinger, and then Nixon returned jubilant from China.
Not only have we completed a week of intensive talks at the highest levels, we have set up a procedure whereby we can continue to have discussions in the future. We have demonstrated that nations with very deep and fundamental differences can learn to discuss those differences calmly, rationally, and frankly, without compromising their principles.
It was a great scare for our leaders, who decided that an anti-Soviet coalition was being formed, which included not only America and NATO, but also China. We felt we were being surrounded.
The Moscow reaction was that a summit which we had tried to achieve before the trip to China, and in which they had been stonewalling us and tried to use it to, well, to put it kindly, blackmail us into untoward concessions, or concessions we thought were untoward. Suddenly, they agreed to the summit, and it unfroze our relations.